Welcome to the Philippine Geographical Society lecture series. This is the third one that we are having for this year. My name is Kathy Lustre and I will be the moderator for this afternoon's online session of the PGS lecture series. For this session, we will be joined by a dynamic speaker, Evangeline Katigbak Montoya, as she discusses the topic on navigating the future, hope, education, and aspirations for future lives among Filipino migrants in Singapore. During the presentation, attendees will be on mute, but we encourage you to interact with the online community attending this session by typing your comments and questions in the chat box or through our social media accounts in Twitter and Facebook. Questions will be addressed during the open forum. This lecture series is being simultaneously streamed in the UP Department of Geography YouTube channel. Also, please note that this meeting is being recorded and will be made available for viewing after the event. And just to give you a heads up, we will be taking a group photo before we end the meeting. So please be ready to turn on your video for that activity. And now, to give the opening remarks, I would like to call Professor Eman Garcia, President of the Philippine Geographical Society.
Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. We are on another episode of the PGS Lecture Series 2021. On behalf of the Philippine Geographical Society and the UP Department of Geography, I again have the honor of welcoming you in this afternoon's lecture. The PGS Lecture Series is part of our objectives to promote geography in lieu of an actual NCGS or National Conference on Geographical Studies, which we conduct annually. Through this, we hope to highlight the different geographic researches being done by our fellow geographers and allies in the field. This afternoon, our invited speaker will share her research on Filipino migrants in Singapore. And same as what we did last time, I am showing you the word cloud from the registration in this lecture. Here, we see the word OFW as being the most prominent. Other words include Filipinos, diaspora, sacrifices, labor, and bagong bayani. We also see the words USA, Canada, dollars, abroad. There are also words that describe the plight of some of our OFWs, abuse, hardship, racism, andyan din yung diligent, hardworking, and these are all an interesting mix of words and concepts which we hope can be included in this afternoon session. On this note, I again would like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. And as always, I hope we have a very special and productive afternoon. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Eman. And of course, now I am very pleased to introduce our speaker for this afternoon. She is a geographer whose research interests include transnational migration and emotional geographies. She obtained both her bachelor and master's degrees in geography from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. She also taught in the same university prior to going to Singapore in 2009 for her doctoral studies at the National University of Singapore. At present, she is a faculty member at the International Studies Department, De La Salle University. Please give a warm welcome to Evangeline Katigbak Montoya.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Eman, Professor Eman, and everyone, Professor Joe, for inviting me to this PGS lecture series. It's good to be back to uh, to the UP Department of Geography, the best and the only geography department in the Philippines. No? So, kagaya ng sinabi ni Kathy kanina, okay, I am a geographer through and through, from my bachelor's up to the even postdoc. ay geography, no? So, ayan. So today I will be talking about the intersections of hope, education, aspirations, future lives, and just national families. So my lecture is entitled Navigating the Future, Hope, Education, and Aspirations for Future Lives Among Filipino Migrants in Singapore. I for this lecture and for the paper that I am writing, uh, dun sa aking research, no? So I build on Apadurai's conception of aspiration as a navigational capacity for the future and juxtapose this with the idea of hope to develop an analytical lens that captures the ways by which education and migration are employed by families to navigate the imagined future geographies of their younger members' lives. No? So yung mga bata, kabataan within the family, of course, in our culture, as in the cultures of so many other countries around the world, in children, they are the pivot of the family. No? So sila yung pag-asa, sila yung future ng family, and they invest a lot for better futures for the lives of these young people. So I draw on the case of migrant Filipino families in Singapore who migrate primarily for work, but where the future lives and education of children remain a primary consideration. So first, why hope? Why make an argument? So this is the outline for today's lecture. So I will be talking about the background of the study, background as in theoretical and conceptual background, and then I will be moving on to the objectives, the methods and the methodology, and then the empirical discussion, and then finally the conclusions of the lecture. So why hope and why make an argument for it? Are all hopes equal? So ang hope, this concept, this idea is an everyday idea, and oftentimes we take this for granted. So my theorization of hope is still exploratory. I would be happy to hear your thoughts, your comments, suggestions on how I can better conceptualize hope in transnational migration after the lecture. Okay, so what is hope? Some scholars have noted the neglect of hope in social analysis. Again, this is significant and it warrants our attention because hope is an everyday category of experience. Mahalaga siya sa atin in our everyday lives. Lagi natin siyang naririnig. But oftentimes, again, because it is so mundane, it is so ordinary, we take it for granted. It's just a given. So for me, and I join the voices of scholars who argue for the need to move hope away from being a normative banner of optimism. So when we speak of hope, we're talking about something that is very positive. It's a positive feeling. Mostly associated also with our religious backgrounds, right? Our religious thoughts and values, particularly in Christianity. Sa Bible, punong-puno siya ng hope. But for today's lecture and for the purpose of my research, I will move away from hope being a banner of optimism and relocate it to an ethnographic category in critical analysis. So it's not to strip it of its positive trappings, but it is again to just relocate it to an idea that this is something that is of importance to our everyday life. It shapes our aspirations, it frames our lives in so many ways, and hence we need to understand the performative nature of hope and how again it frames our lives in both in the present as well as the future, no matter how near or far that imagined futures are. Okay, so hope being an anticipatory expectation and a desire for something better, a crucial dynamic motivating migration processes can provide us with a conceptual framework useful for interrogating migrant aspirations and future geographies. Now, the future is always uncertain. It is always at work. You are working towards whatever future you imagine or whatever future you desire or whatever future you hope for. And this idea of uncertainty about the future is a precondition for hope. Okay? May slant ang future na hindi natin alam. So it's a not yet. No, you're not yet there. You haven't achieved your goals yet. So yung slant na yon, yung opening na yon, aperture na yon, yun yung again precondition for hope. There are uncertainties, there are periods of waiting. And so yung again yung openings na yun are very important in how we understand hope as framing the futurity of our lives. That is my argument, or part of my arguments. Now, so aspirations are, in the next slide, aspirations are relational than personal. So Appadurai, in his seminal work, argues that aspirations are cultural capacities. So aspirations are properties of culture, where culture is a dialogue between aspirations and sedimented traditions. Individuals thus may navigate the world of possibilities of the future while remaining grounded in their situated geographies. So again, a projection of future may be near, may be far, but oftentimes you're still grounded in whatever geographies you are in. So I argue for understanding the aspirational capacities of the members of transnational families, especially the children. By children, I mean both the young children and the young adult, the youth within. So anak, children as anak, not just as bata. Okay, especially because they are seen as deployable resources. Children are often seen as deployable resources for the family's various strategies for capital accumulation. Again, you invest in children because the idea is in the Filipino consciousness, no, yung idea na sila yung mag-aahon sa hirap, sila ang pag-asa ng pamilya, etc. So they are resources. To better understand this argument, I suggest that we examine how hope intersects with the aspirations of individual members of transnational families to construct and articulate their own imagined future lives, even while such desires may be entangled within the larger and perhaps more complex configuration of familiar aspirations. Now, so we weave through the concepts of hope, aspirations, transnational families, education, and migration. And in the succeeding discussion, I explained the roles of migration and education in achieving the hopes and aspirations of middling migrant Filipino families for their imagined future lives. Okay, middling migrant Filipino professionals. I will explain this later. So, hope in this lecture, I argue that hope acts as a spatio-temporal anchor that more people in the here and now, even as their aspirations are projected onto the future and elsewhere. Okay, so when we talk of migration, like dun sa kaninang cloud, no, nakita natin na ang migration doon sa mga words that were associated by yung attendees sa migration, they talked about sacrifices, US, etc. And yung mga emotional subjectivities ng migrants like diligent, so sacrificial, etc. So yung mga ganon. So yung migration at emotional subjectivities and characteristics na to, my argument is that hope acts as mooring people. Even while their hopes and their aspirations are towards the future, they are moored in the present. So they are transformed in the present. Their identities are reconstructed, deconstructed, reconstituted in the present. Well, again, looking at the future. So I draw from my in-depth interviews with 24 Filipino migrant families living in Singapore conducted in late 2017 up to 2018. My interviews included 18 fathers, 21 mothers, 10 children who were interviewed separate from their parents. The families were given an option to participate in a one-on-one and family group interviews. There were 9 family group interviews, 15 interviews with parents only. The reason for this were varied, but mostly concerned the differences in the schedule of family members. Okay, so there were 6 interviews with children only. 2 of these were as a group. two groups of three siblings. 7 children were included in the family group interviews and were subsequently interviewed separate from their parents, while three participated in one-on-one interviews. The parents were in their early 30s at the time of interview were in their early 30s to mid 50s, while the ages of children interviewees range from 15 to 24. The parents were all professionals who have been living in Singapore with their families for more than 5 years, while the majority of children have graduated from polytechnic universities. So yung educational system in Singapore is different from our educational system here. Meron silang junior college na I think equivalent ngayon dun sa K to 12 natin, no? Yung from 7 to 12. I think that's the equivalent of the junior college naman sa Singapore. So Cambridge style sila. Now, why middling migrants and who are they? Who are the middling migrants? It is important to investigate the experiences of middling professionals and their migrant families to address the unwarranted neglect of their concerns in social analysis and theorization. So, who are the middling migrants? They are not the transnational elites. Neither are they the low-wage migrant workers. If you look at our transnational actors, right, or transnational migrants, my hierarchy. You have the global talents on top, mostly or transnational elites, and then you have the middling migrants, and then you have the low-wage migrant workers, mostly domestic workers, construction workers, also who are in the service sector, food and beverage, for example. Now, sa theorization ng migration and migrants, may missing yung middle, because there were a lot there are a lot of works on the transnational elites. So the works of, say, for example, Iowa Ong, who talked about flexible citizenship, the super wealthy migrants, East Asian migrants to North America. No? So yan yung mga transnational elites. And then again, napakadami ng mga naisulat na at pag-aaral patungkol dun sa mga domestic workers. But missing yung nasa middle. And particularly in the Philippine case, no, hindi natin masyadong napapagtuunan sila ng pansin. So my study veers away from that, or it deviates from that in a sense, and it fills the gap doon sa kaalaman natin patungkol sa mga karanasan ng mga middle migrant, no, sa mga professional sila. The transnational circuits of the mobilities of these global talents differently shape the configurations of their capacities toward constructing and achieving their familial aspirations, because they're not too wealthy to, in a sense, move around at will, but they're not too poor naman na hindi nila ma-access yung ibang say economic and social possibilities na hindi ma-access nitong nasa ilalim ng mga low-wage migrant workers. Again, particularly in the case of Filipinos overseas, much of what have been studied in the past has focused mainly on the experiences of Filipino domestic workers, caregivers, seafarers, yung mga nurses, and their left behind families. So the focus on Filipino families in Singapore is also significant because it moves away from the traditional idea that Asian destination countries attract mainly contractual workers who are unable to bring their families with them. So we have this idea that if you're migrating to another Asian country, then you are migrating alone. In fact, in one of my interviews with some personnel some staff from the Philippine Embassy in Singapore, ang sabi sa akin, this is not, referring to Singapore, this is not a country of immigration. Countries of immigration in the Philippine experience, ito yung mga nasa US, ito yung US, Australia, European countries, but not Singapore, not Asian countries. So this is, again, veering away from that idea that when you move to an Asian country, you're moving alone because you are on a contractual basis. It also speaks about, how we are opening up to destinations other than Europe and North America. The popularity of Singapore as a migration destination among Filipinos can be attributed to a number of factors. Una, mayaman sila, and hence may kapabilidad na magbigay ng mas mataas na sweldo kumpara sa ano yung nare-receive dito. Pangalawa, medyo stable, or not medyo, but stable yung kanilang political geography. And then, of course, the relative geographical proximity to the Philippines. You know, I know some people who worked in Singapore, parang ginagawa niyang probinsya lang yung isang bansa. Every month, pag may piso fare, umuwi siya. No? Kasi sabi niya, mas masarap mamuhay sa Pilipinas, kaya lang ang pera ay mas mahirap. So, pumupunta ng Singapore, but the everyday life is still constructed and lived in the Philippines. Okay, but in Singapore, there is this sense of according to Brenda Yo, there's this idea of a bifurcated nature of Singapore's foreign policies, meaning may differences in my ranking based on skills. So the work pass system, or commonly known as work visa is the main policy instrument through which Singapore manages and control its foreign workforce. As a control measure, the work pass system streams for generally two categories of foreign workers, so professional and skilled, and semi-skilled. Only those holding professional and skilled passes are qualified to bring their families to Singapore as dependents, provided they meet the specific minimum salary criteria. So yung streaming nito ay talagang mahigpit. Hindi lamang dahil kailangan may required kang visa, kailangan professional and skilled ka para makapagdala ka ng pamilya mo. Kung hindi, kung nandun ka na sa system na yon, kailangan makapag-meet ka pa ng certain minimum salary. So there are professionals who are unable to meet the salary criteria kasi mataas. So hindi nila madala yung kanilang pamilya. So may implication ito sa aking research, because my research therefore streams for particular economic standing of migrants. This means that only those who have reached the specified salary that the state allows for applying for dependent passes, or the legal document for their non-working family members, were included in the research. So may class component. As well, Filipino families that are permanent residents and naturalized Singapore citizens of Filipino descent were involved in the study. Again, that is a signpost for, may ibang politics of choice and belonging involved in the study. Iba siya sa experience ng mga domestic workers in Singapore, for example. So the succeeding discussion, I will be moving to the main part of the lecture, which is a discussion of the empirical material, which hope and aspirations into registers. First, the economies of hope and aspirations, and secondly, their spatiotemporalities. So, hope is of the future. Nagaya siya ng aspiration. It's a property of the future. It therefore enables discipline, deferment of other desires deemed to be secondary in imagined future lives, and the transformation of oneself to prepare for the future, all in the present. Again, the view is towards the future, but the transformations of one's attitude, one's identity is located in the present. So I look at this in the context of the aspiration for future lives of my participants through education. So in the Philippines, families attach great importance to securing a college or university diploma, part yan ng Philippine dream. Culturally, a college diploma is deemed a ticket to a better life. Okay, kaya tuwang-tuwa, di ba, lalo na siguro sa provinces na mas mahirap ang kapital, no, at ang pera para makapagpaaral ka sa universidad, yung college diploma is a prize in itself. So it is a familial aspiration that every family work towards to achieve. So you have, we are familiar with narratives na, hihinto muna ako para yung isa makapag-aral kasi hindi sapat ang kita. No? So, familial yung dream. Yung sacrifices is familial. No? So, yung isa nag-aaral siyang mabuti kasi nagsakripisyo yung isang tumigil para makapag-aral siya. or yung material na manifestation na yung ating mga college diploma dinidikit sa wall, no? So meron tayong mga idea kasi again, this is part of success, no? This is counted as success sa consciousness ng mga Pilipino at kultura ng mga Pilipino. The families in my research, parents and children alike, have not abandoned the Philippine dream of having a university degree. So again, in the context of Singapore, university degree is different from a polytechnic degree. Ang polytechnic mas vocational. Pero may streams kasi. Pag university ka, for university ang stream mo na estudyante sa Singapore, mas parang elite. Pag polytechnic, normal ka lang, ordinaryo. No? Pero yung university na stream, napakahirap nito kasi alam natin, no, ang Singapore education system is touted as one of the world's best, one of the world's most efficient. So may certain portion lang ng mga kabataan ang nakakapasok sa universities in 4 state universities in Singapore. So elite siya. So, medyo mahirap. So, ang punto is medyo mahirap itong ma-access ng mga non-citizens at lalo na ng mga migrante. Okay? So, the familial aspiration of attaining a university degree often leads to parents suspending their lives for their children, no, in terms of their identity. So, for example, si Margot, sabi niya, my husband and I want to retire and go back to the Philippines. They have been in in Singapore for 20 plus years. We are already old. Nasa 50s na sila. We also want to enjoy our lives, but our children want to attend university. We have to support them in this aspiration. We'll have to stay here to work for a few more years. Bakit? Kasi mahal. No, it's very expensive to send their children to universities. Now, sabi ko kanina, elite yung group na nakakapasok sa public university or state universities in Singapore. 4 lang na state universities. Pero may option na makapag-graduate ka ng university. Pero ito yung may hierarchy pa din eh. Yung state universities, Singapore State Universities, and then yung mga universities na partner universities ng other universities from abroad. No, so because of the transnationalization of education. So say for example, as a university from Australia having a branch in Singapore, so some people can access that. Kung hindi sila makapasok sa state university graduate pa rin sila. Mayroon pa rin silang college certificate, university certificate. Kaya nga lang, again, mahal pa rin. So, kailangan talaga magtrabaho. Okay. So, in this context, the pursuit of a university degree is a familial aspiration that families work towards, but the cost is the suspended lives of parents. Put differently, parental duties are primary, while the individual and spousal dreams are suspended until after their parents have, or until after the parents have graduated from the responsibility of putting their children through college. All of the parents that I interviewed conveyed that only once their children have finished their studies, meaning university, have graduated from the university, they can be free to enjoy their lives and pursue what they want for themselves. So may prioritization in terms of identity. Suspended yung, this is what I want, but my children needs me. But they want to have university degrees, di susuportahan ko, i-mute ko muna yung aking ibang identities, yung aking ibang dreams so that I can support my children. So children naman acknowledge this and are mindful of their parents' sacrifices. They seek to excel and at least finish college on time. According to Laika, she had just graduated from Polytechnic. Nakagraduate na siya, meron na siyang diploma. Pero gusto niya ng university. Gusto niya makapasok sa university kasi iba daw ang polytechnic sa university. Ang context noon is measured sa Pilipinas. Yung mga pinsan niya ay university graduates, kaya lang siya polytechnic. So, hindi siya pareho. So, gusto niyang maging at par with her cousins in the Philippines. So we have recently built our own house in the Philippines, according to Laika. I know that my parents want to retire and enjoy it. They're already in their 50s, but I want to go to uni. So I really have to strive and finish so they can do what they want. So for children, the suspended lives of their parents are met with equal sacrifice. The suspension of other desires that might delay from finishing college. So yung boyfriend-boyfriend, no, o yung mga clubbing-clubbing, suspended din yun. Yun ang gusto nila. Kaya lang gusto nilang i-honor naman yung sacrifice ng, ng parents. Of course, it's not homogeneous. I sense that in reality, there are a lot of Filipino children who are not in the same page as Laika. Maaring hindi naman nila gusto eh. Ayaw nilang nakatapos na sila ng pag-aaral ng polytechnic, enough na yun. But in all of my interviews, ganun yung lumabas. Na they want to honor their parents' sacrifices and so they want to really finish. Some of them nakatapos na ng polytechnic and they felt that their parents have to, their parents are already free from the responsibility of sending them to college. So, nangungutang na lang sila. Naglo-loan sila sa bangko. May mga means naman yun. At sila na yung nagpa-finance ng kanilang university education. So, middling migrants, next slide. Middling migrants are structurally anxious subjects. Again, insecurely poised between demands of material necessity and aspirations for upward social mobility. But they do not often possess the absolute confidence of those with cultural capital and cosmopolitanism derived from extensive prior experience of travel or economic power to move at will or even to own properties in other country, in more than one country, or and so on. So even so, and perhaps because of this, middling migrants are strategic in their performance of hope in the present for their imagined futures. So yung construction ng imagined futures nila. Parents express this by making a way in the world for their children. So the fulfillment of familial education aspirations are not disconnected from other life aspirations, as in citizenship. So a number of my respondents have expressed willingness to apply for citizenship as this would facilitate their desires for their children's education. So kagaya nitong sinabi ni, so this is university education by way of citizenship. I mentioned earlier that state universities, the elite universities of Singapore are oftentimes just accessible to citizens. And even yung mga sa primary level, ang hirap kumuha ng slot for non-citizens. So itong mga migranteng na kausap ko sa participants ng aking study, sabi nila, this is part of our responsibility. We have to make a way for our children. They want to access universities. And again, Singapore, nandito na, yun ang main argument. Andito na eh, babalik ka pa ba sa Pilipinas? You are already in Singapore, which again has one of the best educational system in the world. So, nandito ka na, i-access mo na. So for some of them, this making a way for their children means citizenship. Acquiring Singapore citizenship to access yung best schools in Singapore. So a number of my respondents, so particularly for Horace, sabi niya, a major consideration for applying for Singapore citizenship was their children's education. They wanted the best school for their children, but without the passport, the citizenship, according to him, it would be very, very difficult because they will not be prioritized in schools where they want to enroll their children. In fact, I talked with someone na sabi niya napakasakit sa puso niya, no? Hindi pa siya nagko-convert, pero napakasakit sa puso niya kasi taga-UP siya. Napakasakit daw ng puso niya na maisip that in time, he might have to convert to Singapore citizen. Kasi ito yung 4 years old pa lang naman yung anak niya. Pero iniisip niya na yun. Sabi niya kasi I'm a patriot. Mapagmahal daw niya sa bansa. Again, UP siya, etc., etc. Pero una ang kanyang pagiging ama. No? So, kailangan yung sacrifice na yun para sa kanyang anak. No? So, ito, university education by way of citizenship strategy for the future. So hope structures our aspirational capacities and imaginations of future lives by avoiding possible distractions in the present, or being strategic about performing hope in one's aspirational capacity. This includes migrating to a place where their hopes for a better future would be realized. No, so in sa next slide, I underscore the importance of a global sense of place, or viewing place as open and unbounded, in order to understand the relationship of place, the constructions of familiar futures, and aspirations. So in this context, place is reproduced as it relates to other places through various placemaking activities emplaced individuals and institutions. Okay, so using this analytical lens, we see how the production of place in world cities such as Singapore underscores the fluidity of place and the porosity of its boundaries. It enables the imagined futures of children and transnational families to be transplanted. So the Philippine dream transplanted to Singapore, and realizing places that they deem are more productive than others while still being deeply rooted in particular geographical setting. Here we see how hope and future fuses with aspirational capacities of children in transnational meeting families. The openness of place enables their desires to propel children and their families to transform themselves in their social spaces to achieve their imagined futures. So, again, yung trans migrants, they materialize their hopes, aspirations, and imagined futures in place. Hindi siya deterritorialized. They are located in particular places, and such places are often pursued through migration. And may bearing then again yung educational system in that particular area. Okay? So for example, for Stanley, sabi niya, I opted to give up my Filipino citizenship because I know where foreigners stand in Singapore. In job hirings, for example, the priority will always be Singaporeans, not even PRs. So, yan. So, sinasabi niya lang na alis siya, nag-convert siya ng citizenship again because, dito ma-realize yung dream namin as a family. So, he has to root himself by becoming a citizen so that, para may stability yung kanyang future at future ng kanyang pamilya doon sa sa Singapore, sa migrant place. Okay. What is currently in place, next slide, what is currently in place is associated with particular imagined possibilities in the future. Hence, place is important in the futurity of lives and aspirations. Okay, so mahalaga yun dahil kung ano yung naroroon, for my interviewees, for example, they saw convenience and safety as important in their imagined future lives. Sabi nila, lalo na kung babae, mas mahalaga na safe sila. So dito na lang tayo sa Singapore, wag nang bumalik sa Pilipinas. Convenient pa. But beyond convenience and safety, ang sinasabi nila doon is the education of children is to be also an important mark at which ties to a place would either be strengthened or severed. Many parents spoke about returning to home, which for the majority means the Philippines, after the children have finished uni. But then again, there are transformations in identities in the present and as an anchor to the future. For the children that I interviewed, iba naman ang sa kanila. The place to eventually settle and reach their dreams is neither Singapore nor the Philippines, but elsewhere. So for Stanley's family, for example, each of them eyes different countries of settlement in the future. Okay, so ang mag-asawa sa Pilipinas, yung isang anak sa Canada, yung isa sa Australia, yung isa sa Singapore. Citizens sila, by the way. They are holders of one of the most powerful passports in the world. For Alice naman, another interviewee, sabi niya, I like Singapore, but I won't be able to do my PhD in Singapore because it's very expensive. So I relocate. Okay, so ito, so may spatio-temporal dimensions of hope and aspirations, anchoring people to, mooring people to the present, transforming lives in the present for for the future, for their imagined futures. So to conclude, I examined the value of hope in the constructions of familial aspirations and the role of transnational migration and education in achieving such desires. The analytical lens of hope and aspirations were employed to analyze the differential capacities of middling migrants and their families to imagine future lives. Okay, mahalaga siya dahil again, not all hopes are equal. Oftentimes, they are differentiated along um, class. Like again, this is and I underlined this at the start of the lecture, that these people are, their lives and experiences are very different from those of, domestic workers who don't have the capability, uh, economic as well as political and social, to bring their families in places where they migrate. Okay, so again, not all hopes and aspirations are equal. However much you want them to be. No, in reality, they're not. The middling migrants are important. Their experiences and migration trajectories are important for us to consider. They're in betweenness in terms of the hierarchy. Now, so hope, although characteristically of the future, serves also again as a spatiotemporal anchor for migrants present and future here and elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanji. It's really very interesting to see the inclusion of hope, which is a positive feeling in the analysis of the aspiration of transnational families for better lives. And as we've heard from your research, no, this usually includes the parents providing a good education for their children. All right. Um, so far, we don't have any questions that are posted in our chat box. Pero pwede naman tayo magbigay ng second chance para dun sa mga may ihahabol na mga tanong. If you could type your questions in the chat box, or if you feel like talking, pwede naman mag-unmute so we can hear your questions, if not your comments. I'm sure marami pang pwedeng ma-share ng mga insights si Vanji sa atin ngayong hapon. Ayan. So Vanji, um, for Singapore, it's really the middling migrants, ano? Because I've heard of your other studies na in different areas naman na how do you compare halimbawa yung mga middling migrants that you've interviewed in Singapore to say yung dati I heard your talk about migrants naman in Italy and their relationship with their families in Batangas. May nakita ka bang similarities or magkaiba talaga sila ng mindset and aspirations?
Okay. Okay. Una, yung mga migrante sa Italy at itong migrante sa mga middling migrants sa Singapore, they are in a very different social locations. Like, yung mga nasa Italia, kahit sila ay mga domestic workers, they are able to bring their families with them, through the family reunification strategies, policy programs of the state, the Italian state. This option is not present for domestic workers and other semi-skilled workers in Singapore. So, again, magkaibang level siya in that sense na itong mga domestic workers nasa Italia, pwede nilang dalahin ang kanilang pamilya, may access sila sa ibang mga benefits of being a worker in Italy. On the other hand, you have middling migrants na pwede nilang dalahin ang kanilang pamilya din, no? Kaya lang iba yung kanilang experience kasi hindi sila domestic workers. Magkaiba ang experience nila, but pareho in the sense that they are able to reunify with the family in migrant places in the host country. ang para sa akin ang main na pagkakaiba is yung kanilang kapasidad na pumili ng or mag-aspire ng kanilang mag-define, mag-construct ng kanilang future lives. So for the middling migrants, they are in a better capacity because economically they are more well off than the other group of migrants in Italy. For the doon naman sa mga nasa Italia, isang nine-negotiate nila is yung distance naman sa Pilipinas. No? Aside from the economic factor na mas, of course, maliit yung kanilang maipapadala sa Pilipinas, mas matagal sila bago umuwi. So, yung physical, yung proximity, sa consciousness pa naman at sa kulturang Pinoy, at least sa mga previous studies, no, may prioritization sa physical propinquity ng pamilya, no? Yung hug, no? yung mga touch na ganyan, mahalaga sa atin. No? Eh, hindi nila yung magawa, yung mga nasa Italia. Yung mga nasa Singapore naman, aside from the fact na nakakasama na yung mga anak, mas madali silang umuwi at mag-connect with the other members of the left behind families in the Philippines.
Thank you. That's interesting to see, no? Yung comparison between different types of migrants, how they build their lives, they see the future. Ayan. We also have a question here from Sergio. Can place also be seen as imaginary with respect to how hope and aspiration are tied to place? So the context that he included here is, I wonder if place, Singapore, is more about possibilities of work, education, employment, and social mobility. So Singapore as a place is not just geographical, but as an imagined space of possibilities.
Maganda yung point na nire-raise ni Sir John, no? And I think it's also important, no, as geographers, no? Paano ba natin nakikita yung mga place in terms of our imaginings, both in the present and for our future lives. Singapore, yes, I agree. It is imagined as a space of possibilities. And again, this is for me as well significant because these are, as not as special, but a particular group of migrant people who can access particular forms of possibilities in Singapore, which other groups of migrant Filipinos cannot, like again, the domestic workers, as well as those other professionals na wala dun sa category ng salary na pwede silang magdala ng kanilang pamilya. No, there are different negotiations. So if this is the case, if so imaginary siya, yes, in a sense, but there are also physicalities and materialities attached to it. So you're a professional. Singapore is a very good location, at least in your imaginations. Ang ganda niya, malapit, maganda ang sweldo. Kaya lang may consideration ka, may materiality ka na hindi mo ma-realize. So professional ka, may mas may offer halimbawa sa Poland, no? Hindi equal yung salary, kaya lang madadala mo yung pamilya mo. So yung yung sense na yon na magma-materialize doon sa lugar na ito, and not in Singapore where your imaginations of your future lives might mas mataas, pero yung materiality ng gusto mong mangyari sa present mo and maybe in the future, that magabayan ko yung aking pamilya na magkakasama kami. And I saw this in some of my interviews. So for example, may isang interviewee na sabi niya, hindi ako citizen, no? And I barely met the criteria of being able to bring my families in Singapore. Kaya lang sabi niya, kung wala akong makukuhang slot sa mga schools dito, and this is a very common problem for Filipinos, and I would think other nationalities as well. Wala siyang makuhang slot sa schools, babalik na lang sila ng Pilipinas kahit mas mababa ang sweldo. Mahalaga, mag-materialize yung desire niya na magkakasama sila. So yung imagination ng future lives. Yes, maganda ang buhay, pero magkakasama. Dito sa isang lugar, hindi gaanong maganda ang sweldo, pero magkakasama ang pamilya. So again, it depends, I think, on one's imagination of what your future hopes and future lives would be.
Ayan. May isa pa tayong question, na medyo connected din diyan sa huli mong sinabi 'no. Celeste would want to know, how were the experiences of the migrants once they get to Singapore, for instance, as compared to their expectations and aspirations before migrating? Meron bang naging difference? Na-meet ba yung expectation na yun?
At least dun sa aking mga interviewees, no, yes. So,
Mhm.
ang iba-iba kasi yung trajections, no, ng trajectories ng kanilang migration. So, yung iba, nauna muna yung tatay, tinignan niya kung pwede ba ito sa aking pamilya? Pwede ba itong, you know, nung umalis siya, meron silang kinoconstruct na familial dream na kikita ng malaki, magkakasama ang pamilya. Pagdating niya ng Singapore, pwede ba ito sa pamilya ko? May isa naman na, parang Saudi style. No, aalis lang yung tatay, mag-iipon ng pera, magpapadala, pero babalik din. Pero nakita niya, I think it's, if I remember correctly, this is the family of Stanley. Yun ang kanilang desire, parang Saudi type. Aalis yung tatay, magpapadala, at babalik after na makapag-shore up ng enough wealth for the family, for the future of the family. Kaya lang, pagdating niya, nakita niya may opportunity for family reunification. So yung kanyang pre-migration hope, yung pre-migration familial aspirations, very different from what happened after. So dumating yung asawa, initially for bakasyon lang, kaya lang nagkaroon siya ng opening nagkaroon ng opportunity for work. Sabi niya, ang kondisyon niya, kailangan madala yung mga anak. Pag hindi, babalik siya ng Pilipinas. Nagkataon, nadala niya yung anak niya. So nagbago ngayon yung trajectories in terms of their expectations, in terms of what they saw was or yung possibility doon sa lugar na yun. And then after so many years, iba naman ulit yung trajectory. Ang hope nila, ang aspiration nila when they yung nagka-reunify ni sila is sama sila doon. But eventually, nagkaroon na naman ng pagbabago dun sa kanilang aspirations. Sabi nila, so along the way, nagkaroon sila ng mga trabaho, nakapagpundar ng investments dito sa Pilipinas. So sabi niya, yung mag-asawa, babalik sa Pilipinas. So hindi na sa Singapore. Yung mga anak naman, again, nagkaroon ng panibagong hope and aspirations. Iba naman din ang kanilang idea naman ng future. Okay, so may pagbabago over time and space. So yun yung spatio-temporalities ng hopes and aspirations. Nagbabago siya over time. Flexible in a sense.
Right. So yung next question naman natin, asks about, is the hope and aspiration of the people you've interviewed, is this tied to a specific child, or does this apply to all the children? So, and also, do all the siblings, do they feel the same to the parents' aspirations? Nagtutugma ba yung aspiration ng parents at saka ng mga bata?
Okay, I think I mentioned this earlier na ang sense ko is may mga, when I talked about Laika and how some children, at least in my interviews, they sought to honor the sacrifices of their parents. And so they worked hard to achieve yung kanilang familial aspiration of graduating from a university. I had one interviewee na because this is a familial dream and sabi ng research in the Philippine context, the personal is also the family. No, or the family is also, the personal is also the family. So yung personal hopes and aspirations ng mga bata para sa pamilya talaga siya. No, or yung parents para sa kabuuan ng pamilya. So ang ginawa ng parent, kakagraduate lang ng polytechnic, ang ginawa nila, nagpunta sila sa isang university at in-enroll na yung anak nila. So wala nang kawala yung anak nila. Sila na yung nag-decide. In-interview ko yung anak, nasaktan ka ba? How did you feel about, your parents deciding for you? Sabi niya, okay lang sa kanya. No? Hindi ko alam kung dahil mabait lang ba siya or pero sabi niya okay lang sa kanya kasi familial dream yan. So, baka nga mabait lang siya, no? Sobrang bait niya. So kinonstruct niya din yung kanyang imagination of the future as, participating in this familiar dream of having panganay pa naman siya, having a university degree, and your children, yung siblings niya, younger children, younger siblings would follow suit, na lahat sila makaka-graduate ng university, so that pride ng parents nila, yun ang kanyang sabi, pride din ng parents nila na nakapag-graduate ng universities yung mga anak. Now, specific ba sa isang bata or to all their children? And I will connect this. Sorry, Kathy, i-connect ko na. Nakita ko yung isa kanina. Yung sa military conscription. Yung military service. Now, for some people, and this is beyond my interviews, and this is based on my interaction with other Filipinos in Singapore, pag male, because nga may military service, I know of some people who migrated to the US. Pag malapit na yung anak nila na mag-serve sa military, kasi may national service na tinatawag for permanent residents. At maraming mga Filipino permanent residents in Singapore. Dun sa mga interactions ko with them, some of them migrated to the US just because of that male child. No? Kasi ayaw nilang magpunta sa mag-serve ng military service for 2 years. So, for them, what is it for? Anyway, hindi naman kahit mag-citizen sila, babalik din naman sa Pilipinas. So, why would you let your child undergo such rigorous training if you're not a citizen and you don't plan to be? For some naman, iba naman ang kanilang expectation. Iba na naman ang kanilang aspiration. Ang aspiration naman nila is to become citizens. This is a powerful country economically, might as well root ourselves here. So ang way naman is, sige, you serve sa military, sa national service, after that, you will be offered citizenship, get it, and make us your dependents. So iba naman, iba-iba.
Thank you for that, Banji. And I think you also answered the follow-up question of Bernice, who asked that question about the military conscription. All right. So we have another question here from Benjamin. In the course of your research, looking at the other side of the coin naman, have you had the chance to encounter points or variables pertaining to the opposite of hope among migrants and their families? Yung they fall into desperation or disappointment. I'm sure may mga stories ka rin na narinig about yan.
Oo, madami din. Again, this is beyond the scope of the research already, because most of the research were hindi ganun hindi despair, hindi disappointment. But based on my interactions with some Filipinos in Singapore, dinadala yung pamilya pero hindi nakakapasok sa airport, na A to A, airport to airport. Nade-deport sila. I know some people who experienced that. And so, yung aspiration, familial aspiration of reunification, hindi na siya posible. Hindi dahil wala nang pagkakataong makabalik, kung hindi, nasaktan na yung tao. Natakot na siya eh. So, ayaw niya nang bumalik. Now, there are some, naman na, again, Singapore is different from other countries in the sense that you can go to Singapore as a tourist and apply for a job. It's not legal. It's not legal, but you can. And there are a lot of Filipinos who do that. So I know of some people na even domestic workers na nakapagpag-graduate ng mga engineers and other professionals yung anak, dinadala sa Singapore, they will apply for social visit passes for 1 month in the hopes that again, sila naman yung papalit sa nanay, uwi na yung nanay na domestic worker. Sila naman yung magtataguyod ng pamilya. Kaya lang, hindi nakakahanap ng trabaho. So yung disappointment, because you're not able to achieve the hope and the future that you desire for your family. Yun yung mga ganon.
Okay, so we have last 2 questions. So the first one is from Andrew. related to your discussion on citizenship and national identity, how does the children feel regarding their national identity and the planning of their future?
Iba-iba, iba-iba. And it is interesting kung paano siya nagkakaiba-iba. Because there are some interviewees na ang mga anak niya, hindi naman pinanganak sa Singapore, but very, very Singaporean in their consciousness, and very Singaporean in their identification. Some people naman, some interviewees naman, ang anak nila ay pinanganak sa Singapore, pero ang kanilang identification ay very Pinoy. Now, some people naman, is for some studies, for some from interviewees naman, pinanganak sa sa Singapore, at hindi sila permanent residents. Pero pinanganak sa Singapore, meron silang mga long-term passes, dependent passes. Pero very Singaporean at ayaw bumalik sa Pilipinas. Ang problema, hindi makakapag-stay kasi hindi naman permanent resident. So, dependent dun sa kanyang visa. So, iba-iba. Iba-iba. Na-answer ko ba yun? Parang nawala ako dun sa question.
Baka namang nasagot mo. The question about the identity.
Yung identity,
Ayan. And then, I think we only have time for one last. Ito nga yung kay Laura. Were the families, the parents interviewed, migrate to Singapore with families in the Philippines already? Or were some of them single, unmarried at first before migrating? If so, were there any differences to their hope and aspirations prior to and after having a family?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Again, my answer would not be within the study itself. Dahil sa study, dahil it's about transnational families. So sila ay most of them ay nag-migrate na pamilyado na sila. But again, from my interactions with Filipinos in Singapore, may mga nag-migrate as single, nakahanap ng mga kapartner at mga asawa sa Singapore, yung iba sa Pilipinas. So in the course of their migration, nagbago yung kanilang civil status. May pagbabago ba sa aspirations prior to and after having a family? Yes. Because may consideration pa na yung future ng children. So I know some people who single, nag-migrate for work yung lalaki, bumalik sa Pilipinas, nag-asawa, dinala yung asawa sa Singapore, nagkaroon ng anak, yung anak hindi pwedeng magkaroon ng pass, dependent pass, kasi hindi umabot yung kanilang sweldo doon sa criteria of bringing in family members. So yung pass niya, separate sa pass. So pass ng lalaking asawa, separate sa pass ng babaeng asawa. Pero yung bata, hindi makuhaan na ng pass, ng visa. So babalik. Kaya lang, ang sacrifice nito, sino sa kanila yung uuwi to take care? Either ipaalaga or one of them will have to sacrifice. Usually nanay, sa konteksto ng ating kultura, at gender expectations. Meron din naman na prior to having family, gusto niya after Singapore, pupunta pa ng ibang bansa. Parang onward migration. Kaya lang nakahanap ng mapapangasawa sa Singapore, hindi na siya umalis. Meron naman nag-migrate sa family, pero yung anak hindi makakuha ng slot sa school. Hindi naman pwedeng hindi siya mag-aral. So anong gagawin? Babalik yung bata sa Pilipinas. Minsan kasama ulit yung nanay, minsan yung bata na lang. At transnational in the sense na i-raise siya ng parents na nasa Singapore through other relatives in the Philippines. Iba-iba din.
So typical of life decisions. Pag nagkaroon ng bagong situation, some of our hopes and aspirations, the plans and decisions can also change. So thank you very much. Yes, Vanji, may dadagdag ka pa?
I think very significant din yung role ng state because of their policies with regard to immigrants and to migrants. Having said that, of course, meron ding agency naman yung mga tao. Kahit na medyo ang polisiya will state policy ay hindi favorable sa kanila, marami ring paraan ang nagagawa ng mga migrante para mag-insist dun sa gusto nilang future. So oftentimes they are able to go, not go beyond, but maneuver and negotiate the difficulties and the limitations of state policies. But oftentimes, state policies and programs are very definitive of the lives and experiences of migrants, both in the host country as well as in the home countries.
Very nice. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed
Thank
your
you.
presentation, Vanji. And to show, of course, our appreciation, the PGS would be giving a certificate to our speaker for her valuable insights and expertise during this PGS lecture series. Ayan. Ipapadala namin sa'yo yung hard copy niyan, Vanji. Don't worry.
Thank you. The honor is
And
mine.
so we're so happy that you were able to join us and present the results of your study. And with that, we are at the end of our program. I would like to call Professor Joseph Palis, a faculty member of the Department of Geography in the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and board member of the Philippine Geographical Society, to give the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and wonderful, wonderful to hear from the lecture of Dr. Katigbak Montoya. I read parts of the report that she did before, but it's wonderful to really see it contextualized and given a rather um, uh, spatial and geographic spin. Allow me to just get some few points there that you mentioned as a way of closing this webinar. And that is some of the things that resonate with me listening to you talk was also sacrifices. You know, I wish there's also another, and I'm sure this can be something you can theorize in the future, but even looking at also sacrifices, you know, as another analytical tool in terms of how what propel certain kinds of decisions these migrants have to do in order to stay in a place or not go to a place. Cognizant of the fact that there are so many stories that are out there. And in fact, in the questions that we look at here in the chat box, you could see some of the questions that really range from what are some of the discordant notes, so to speak, about your own research that look at hope and aspiration. So the sacrifices can be another thing. And also interesting and maybe quite intuitive, but at the same time wonderful to see it theorized in this way, is also the way flexible citizenship and also the idea of reshaping the identity, both from the parents and the children, occur. No, in the case of Laika and Margot, when they were asked this, they're probably not related. I just assumed that she might be the child because it seems to dovetail that what she said was also what Margot said. But even the idea of how they reshape and how they adjust their own expectations in order to, in the case of Margot, to make sure that her child achieves, you know, the aspirations that she wanted, and in the case of Laika, to make sure that her parents who toiled for her education could also be not compensated, but at least be living contentedly in any place they wanted to, which is pretty much the Philippines. And again, the differential experience of migrants, I love to hear. I love it that despite the fact that there's so many stories about hopes and aspirations, there's also an underlying current about how things can be very different. You know, especially that story you mentioned about asking the child, you know, what does it feel, you know, when parents now wanted to bring you to school and to the university. I wonder too whether this particular research, the beauty of seeing this, at least for me, who's not into demography or population geography or mobility studies, is the fact that you look at the middling families that you said. No, most of the time the stories we heard are low wage workers and in the rather violent space that their diasporic space offers them. No, in a lot of cases. So this is a rather different story, even if they also have to toil and to sacrifice in order to get what they wanted.
Bunch, I really love the hope and aspiration as an analytical lens. It made me really look at a lot of other things, not just my own research, but other research in geography that I thought could also warrant or could be made even more enriched by this analytical lens, especially in how you tie that up to place. Knowing that there are also very different and non-equal ways of experiences, no? And I also end by saying, for example, that at the risk of outing this as a project, but Vanch and I have been talking tentatively about doing something together, and it's Hello, Love, Goodbye, which is a movie which offers a very different view of the usual tropes that we hear from most stories of OFW, and that might be not necessarily that it will be changing the paradigms of mobilities or migration, but it offers an alternative story, to the many stories that are out there of diasporic Filipinos abroad. So thank you and congratulations for that, and talks like this also intellectually excite many of us to look at our own work and look at it with fresh new eyes. Thanks again, Vance, for that opportunity. Is this the point where I need to talk about something, or that comes later? About the maybe I'll do that later. So yeah.
All right. So thank you, Sir Joe. And thank you, everyone, for your participation in the PGS lecture series. Uh, Now we have some announcements. So if you're interested to become a member of the PGS, the organization has an open call for membership. For more information, please go to the PGS website. It's phgeographicalsociety.org. Right. And then our next announcement is that the lecture series, this is actually an ongoing event. And so we would like to request for your feedback to help us prepare and improve our future events. Kindly answer the short survey after this session. So to watch previous sessions of the PGS lecture series, please go to the YouTube channel of the UP Diliman Department of Geography. Don't forget to click subscribe and like. And finally, we would like to invite you to attend upcoming events of the PGS lecture series. And for this, I'd like to call back Sir Joe uh, to talk about our upcoming events.
Thank you very much, Kathy. We have one next Wednesday, if you're available. Raydan Pawilan from UPLB, Department of Social Science, who's trained as a geographer and historian, will give a talk entitled Pedaling Through the Pandemic, Rethinking Safe Spaces for the Cycling Community in the New Normal. Should be very interesting, not only for the cycling community, but also in ways to theorize, what is safe in the era of fugitive landscapes as mandated by the state, right? So another one that's coming up for the month of April, we have two by the PGS lecture series, one by our president, Emmanuel B. Garcia of PGS, of communities and DRR, the role of participatory 3D mapping. Very, should be very interesting. Maybe some of you are familiar with it, but it's going to give focus to a specific barangay or two. That's going to happen 14th of April. The other one is through Zoom. Michael Hawkins from the University of North Carolina will come 7:30 a.m. his time, right, to talk about, this is just a tentative title. It's about the production of space among truck drivers in the port area, Manila. He was here for a Fulbright grant, but had to return back to the US because of COVID-19. But he was able to interact and speak to truck drivers who form a major part of his research in the production of space. And then before the reading break, Pavitra Basodivan, PhD from the University of Texas, Austin, will give a talk about Black geography. She has yet to give us a title, but she recently won the Glenda Loss Fellowship Award from the American Association of Geographers because of her work on environmental racism, focused on North Carolina, where she did most of her research. So very interesting stuff. And of course, May too, but we will tell you more about that next time. So just like the Department of Geography Facebook page, and also updgeography.blogspot.com for more details. Thank you, Kathy.
All right. Thank you, Sergio. Before we end this online meeting, we would like to request our participants for a group photo. So please turn on your video cameras and give us one of your brightest smile to match our bright topic about hope and aspiration.
All right. At the count of three, everyone. One, two, three. Okay. Another one. Wait, medyo marami tayo dito. So
Are you
next,
taking a photo of the first page, or are you going to the second page now?
second
Sorry, just
page, sir.
okay, so that I don't need to keep smiling. Sige.
All right, second page, ready? One, two, three. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. So once again, thank you very much for attending the PGS lecture series on navigating the future, hope, education, and aspirations for future lives among Filipino migrants in Singapore. We look forward to your attendance in succeeding sessions in the upcoming months. All right. Have a good day. Bye.
For you, it's have a good morning from
Yes.
where you are.